Wonderful. Good morning and welcome to Lutheran Child and Family Services of Illinois' annual hybrid community meeting. Today, we're going to be discussing a Stronger Tomorrow roadmap to a child and family well-being system. My name is Latasha Robertson Bifadero, and I use she, her, ella pronouns. And I am the Vice President and Chief Strategy and Innovations Officer here at LCFS, and I'll be serving as y'all's MC for today's event. So let me just first thank you all for joining us here in person. You could have been anywhere else and you decided to choose to spend your time with us, and so we thank you for that. Also, thank you for those of you who are tuning in online and all the people in Illinois and states abroad. I think we have over 100 and some people who are joining us virtually, and we have the folks here in the room, and so thank you for spending your time with us. So because we are doing this as a hybrid event, we got to go over a couple logistics, especially for those folks who are online. We will be utilizing both the chat and the QA functions for those attending online. You can use the chat to share your thoughts and kind of respond to what you're hearing to your peers during the presentations with other online attendees. If you have questions, if you're online, you're going to use the Q&A function, and we will be tuning to that throughout the event and at the end of the event. And then for those of you who are in the room, you'll just raise your hand and we'll have your questions answered aloud. Today's discussion, which I'm really excited about, will include a keynote presentation by Lyman Legters, the Senior Director of Strategic Consulting with KC Family Programs, who spent his professional career facilitating systems transformations to improve outcomes for children and families. Then we'll hear from LCFS President and CEO, Mike Bertrand, who will be highlighting our initial efforts towards really building this system that we're talking about from a child protective system to a child well-being system. So I'm totally excited about our shares today. Y'all excited? Y'all ready to get started? All right, so we're gonna get started. So first I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker today, Lyman Legters, who will discuss how we imagine a 21st century child and family well-being system. Lyman has worked at KC Family Programs, the nation's largest operating foundation devoted to improving outcomes for children and families impacted by the child welfare system since 2002, where he has managed direct service operations and served as a strategic consulting for the foundation. From 2012 to 2015, he was privileged to serve as the Senior Fellow at the U.S. Department of Justice. Lyman currently serves as the Senior Director, Strategic Consulting, working with states and federal partners in support of child welfare systems improvement and transformation. Prior to joining KC Family Programs, Lyman worked in the juvenile justice system in King County, Washington, where his last assignment was leading the juvenile probation department. Facilitating systems transformation and improving outcomes for vulnerable children and families, anti-racism and racial justice have been his particular focuses during his professional career. He currently supports national efforts designed to achieve racial justice and transform child welfare systems into child, family, and community well-being systems. He speaks extensively on racial justice, systems transformation, and organizational health. Lyman serves on the National Board of Directors for the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, the directors of the American Youth Policy Forum, and the National Steering Committee for the Youth Transition Funders Group. He has worked on issues related to justice and equity for more than 30 years, including intersectional dynamics related to race, indigenous peoples, gender, sexual orientation, immigration, and citizenship status. I've also personally had the great opportunity to be in several meetings and forums with Lyman as he engaged individuals, peoples, and institutions to really think about what excellence can look like. And so we are really excited to have you with us, and thank you, Lyman.
Well, good morning, everybody. Nice to see you all this morning. Thank you for that introduction, Latasha. I would have written it differently if I'd known you were going to read it verbatim. It was like that was boring. But no, it's a real privilege to be here. Sorry, let me get my slides set up so that I know what I'm doing. It's a real privilege to be with you this morning. It's a privilege for me to work with the state of Illinois on issues related to child welfare, racial justice. And our foundation is committed to making things happen in jurisdictions. And I think there's a lot of hope and promise here in Illinois. And I hope to touch on that a little bit in my comments today. My wife and I live in Southern California. We moved there to be near our grandbabies. I'm going to introduce you to one of them later in my presentation. We spent 10 years in the DC area prior to moving to California. I had the opportunity to serve in the federal government for a period of time as a senior fellow at the Department of Justice, working on things like what we're going to talk about today: transformation, racial justice, integration of systems and supports, kind of visionary thinking, right? And we lived in a place called Greenbelt, Maryland. It's a small community outside of the district, just outside the Beltway. And in Greenbelt, Maryland, is the Goddard Space Center. Anybody ever visited the Goddard Space Center? They have rocket scientists there. They have people that are planning these rockets going to the moon. They have these teams that are talking about space exploration and where NASA's going to go. Well, it happened there was a meeting there, and one of the teams was gathered around one of these complex questions about how to send a rocket into outer space. And they were stumped. They were absolutely stuck in their meeting. They couldn't figure out the response. The leader was frustrated. The leader of the team finally stood up and said, "Come on, y'all. This ain't child welfare." Okay, I got one joke. I got one joke. But I say that because we don't necessarily understand how complex the work is that we do. And we don't think about it from that kind of complexity. And so I think it's important for us to recognize how complex it is, how complex the systems are, how complex the children, families, and communities that we serve are, and recognize that we're doing some hard stuff in this space. So I really want to honor you all for the work that you do across the state, whatever organization you're with. Thank you, Mike, for the invitation to be here. I'm so impressed with the work that LCFS is doing. See some colleagues from DCFS here, excited for them to be here as well. So let's jump in. Casey Family Programs, as Natasha mentioned, is the largest operating foundation, really solely devoted to improving outcomes for children and families that experience the child welfare system. And it's been a pleasure and privilege to work with this foundation for that 22 years now. And it is a pleasure to do it from the periphery or from the view, the perspective that we have. We don't actually get to do the work. We don't actually get to create the systems transformation, create the programs and the policies. We can advocate and educate and use our influence and resources across the country to bring people together to have these conversations. But we do get to be in space with you all who are doing this work. And it's really amazing to me to be, and then again, a real privilege to be able to do this work alongside you all and to bring the foundation resources, to bring the foundation supports into those conversations. So what I want to invite you to consider today, next slide, please, is this notion of well-becoming. We are, and I'll talk about this in terms of narratives in a little bit, but we're in a system that is really operating on 19th and 20th century principles. The child welfare system in our country is built on this historic rescue movement, right? Saving these poor children from these bad families and then doing all the stuff that we do, right? Using methods that are actually trauma causing in our responses and in our motives to keep children safe. And so that's the invitation today, to think differently. What could we create within the system that is really focused on healing, really focused on serving children and families with what they need, not what the system has to offer, not the methods that we typically use, but really thinking about how we can align ourselves with children, families, and communities, all with the focus of helping them become well. Next slide, please. So our president and CEO, Dr. William Bell, frequently opens our meetings at Casey Family Programs with the question, how are the children? And the point of that question is to keep us driving towards the answer that the children are well. So when that question is asked, we ponder where we are, what do we need to do to get to the response that really is the children are well, the families are well, the communities are well. So I want you to think about children in your lives. So spend a moment just thinking about children in your lives. What do you hope for those children? What is your belief about them? Whether they're your kids, your grandkids, your nieces, nephews, your neighbors' kids. When you see these children that you know, what is your hope for them? And your hope, I'm pretty sure, is one of a bright future, a future of wholeness and wellness and just having all the resources and assets that they need to thrive, that they need to grow into amazing young people, amazing adults. And that's the kind of hope that I think we need to embrace in the work that we do. Can we see that in other children? What do we choose for children in our lives? I'm sorry, I'm supposed to be still because there's a camera on, my fault. What do we choose for our children? Do we choose food or clothing? Clothing or housing? Housing or education? No, we choose it all, don't we? We choose it all. And when we think about the systems and how we're making choices about children, do we do that as a collective? Do we do that? Do we choose everything for the children that we're serving? Do we think about that? No, we choose, well, in child welfare, we choose safety first. I'm not disputing that safety is paramount, but it's not everything. Then we choose permanency. Permanency is great. We want them to be in permanent homes. But then are we done? Are we through? Do we stop? And so there's this notion of well-being, a well-being system that answers that question in a little bit more holistic fashion. So we want to think about the things that we choose for the kids and families that we're concerned about. And lastly, what do we wish? Do we wish the same thing for the children that we serve, for other people's children, that we wish for our own? We were admonished years ago by a young person who was actually an alumni of CARE, who came into one of our annual meetings and said, you know, Casey Family Programs, you're great. You do good stuff. You know, you host really good meetings. You feed people really well. You have great ideas, right? That's the world of philanthropy. You never had a bad meal or a bad idea. But his name was Estacio, and Estacio admonished us that you need to have a standard of your own. And that standard of your own simply says that if it's not good enough for your own child, it's not good enough for any child. And so as we think about well-being, well-becoming, and thinking about reframing our system, transforming our system, I invite you to consider that. I invite you to see your children in the space where we work. And if it's not good enough for your kids, not good enough for any kids. For me right now, it's not good enough for my grandbabies. It's not good enough for any child. Next slide, please. So there are some prevailing narratives. I already mentioned the rescue narrative of child welfare. We're built on essentially 19th century principles when there was a real need to get children off the streets, immigrant children, children who were orphaned or abandoned by the immigrant populations coming from Europe, all kinds of stuff going on. And there was a real need, and the system was essentially mobilized through the faith community to reach out and support these children, to do things for these children. That transitioned obviously into the formal system that we know now, but the narrative has not changed. It's still a rescue movement. We are about going to save these kids. And that's the primary driver of what we do, of what people who are interested in foster parenting and supporting these children and families. It really is about going to save these kids. There's also in our system a law and order narrative. We call it justice, but it's not really justice. It's really control. It's law and order. And so I think about my experience in the juvenile justice system, and that experience really demonstrated that the juvenile justice system, as progressive as we are, certainly there's some progressive work happening here in Illinois. It's really a mini adult criminal system, right? We do the same things. We incarcerate, we put on probation, we go through trials and all these things. And I'm not saying that that's all bad, but if it's everything, then we need to rethink that. We need to think what we want to transform into. The science really supports this notion of well-being, but it's still fragmented because we have science that's child welfare centric. We have science that's criminal justice centric. We have science that's education centric, mental health, behavioral health, community dynamics, fiscal systems, racial justice. And the struggle right now is that the science still fragments and really supports, in essence, the siloed nature of the systems that are serving children and families. So we need to think about how we bring science together to help us consider this notion of transformation. Man, we tinker a lot, don't we? We spend a lot of time tinkering around the edges of the system. That's not bad. We need to improve what we have. So I'm not suggesting that's a negative, but it's not sufficient. When we tinker, we're looking at symptoms, we're looking at circumstances, we're fixing a particular problem without getting to the deep-rooted fundamental issues that are driving the struggles that children and families experience. And so how do we think differently about moving away from, not moving away, adding to our focus on symptoms to getting to root causes? What is it that we need to do to align around root causes? There's also a victim, I'm gonna talk a little bit about identity, us versus them, a little bit later, but we do have this notion or this tendency to identify the children and families we serve from this particular frame, victim or villain, right? They're either somebody who's been hurt, we gotta go save and help and figure out, or they're the villain that caused this thing that we need to do something to protect the child from, or punish, or do something that identifies them as a villain. And that plays out not just in child welfare, but across other systems as well. So those are some of the prevailing narratives. That's not complete by any means, but it's an invitation again to think about what are the narratives that drive us? What are the narratives that drive our work, both in organizations, in systems, and collectively? So those are some of the things that we'll have to consider if we're serious about moving to a transformation discussion, the power of narrative, how that drives the work, and what we need to do to reframe or create a different narrative. Our current systems, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but sometimes the choir needs to hear the word, right? So our current systems essentially operate like this. They're reactive. We respond after something's already happened. In the child welfare space, we're responding to children after there's been an allegation of abuse or neglect, and we're not really moving upstream. The same is true for other systems. We don't intervene until there's already a problem identified. We don't intervene until something tragic has happened. So that's something for us to think about. Can we shift that focus to being more proactive and moving upstream? Our systems are focused on investigations and findings. So we spend a lot of time doing fact-finding, doing full-blown investigations, not just in child welfare, but in other systems as well. So thinking about, is that really the focus of what we want to accomplish, to dig up the most dirt, the most, all of the significant problems that a particular family or a particular individual is facing? And then what does that do? It causes us to create an identity for that child, for that family. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute as well. We're deficit oriented. We're focused on struggles. We're focused on problems. We're focused on developmental delays, developmental struggles. We're focused on poverty-related issues. And not that we shouldn't focus on them, but we have to see children, families, and communities from a different lens. We have to think about them, I think, from a strength-based, healthy lens that allows us to see strength, to see assets in the communities. Our systems, I mentioned this just a moment ago, we actually are trauma-inducing, and we don't recognize that well. And I'm as guilty as anybody working in child welfare, making decisions about foster cases, working in the youth justice system, and doing things back in the day that might be prosecuted for today. So I get the tension. We're drawn into a system and we do what the system tells us to do. But we need to recognize the trauma that's caused by our actions, by our responses, and can there be other responses that get us better outcomes without the trauma that we cause? A child being removed from their family is often more traumatic than the experience that presented them to us in the first place. And we don't talk enough about that. And we don't talk about how to ease that trauma at the front end, nor do we talk about how to heal that trauma as we see kids responding to that trauma. I was just in a set of meetings in South Carolina. I work with Illinois and South Carolina, two completely different places, let me tell you. But the issues that we're facing are the same. They're very similar. So in South Carolina, they're struggling with this cohort of kids who are like refusing placement, who are hard to place, and they're ending up in spending the nights in the offices. I know that some of the problems that are here, hoteling, using office space to keep kids in temporary placements. And the dynamic is that these kids are acting out. They're in the office space, they're tearing up the offices, they're not responding to adult supervision, they're not responding to the professionals, they're fighting, they're doing all these kinds of negative behaviors, and we put that on the kid, right? We put that on the children. How do we get these children? We need to call law enforcement. They need to be locked up. We need to do this, that, and the other thing that really puts it on the kid without recognizing the fact that the circumstance that we put that child in is causing that trauma, which is then causing the behavior. So that's one of the things that we need to really think about. I don't have to say a lot about the fact that our systems are unjust. Illinois is out in front of the conversation around racial justice and other justice-oriented discussions. How do we think about our systems in a way that improves? There's a lot of work to do, but at least within the context of the conversation, there is that focus here in Illinois. And I really encourage our continued discussion on that and how that actually fits. And I'm going to talk again a little bit later about how this notion of justice fits into contemplating a child and family well-being system. Lastly, we're disconnected. So this is true in all states that I've worked in. We've created these systems that are distinct from each other, more based on our professional expertise, our funding streams, laws created for a particular system. We have our own disciplines. Some of us came up through criminal justice system and training and academics. Some came through social work. And so what we have is this kind of siloed nature of the systems where we have child welfare sitting in isolation from education, in isolation from youth justice, in isolation from the behavioral and mental health systems. And we need to think about that. So that's not how, I mean, that's set up to support the systems. That's set up to facilitate our professional interactions, our professional goals. It's not set up recognizing children and families. When a child moves from system to system, they don't recognize that they're moving from DCFS to DJJ, or they're moving from this system to that system. What they recognize is they got some more people in their lives telling them what to do. And so can we think about a coordinated effort? Now, Latasha introduced me as saying that I've worked for 40 years on systems transformation. I should have put a word in there, unsuccessfully. Now I'm committed to it, obviously, but really unsuccessfully, this notion of transformation. So I don't think that it's impossible. I think that it's absolutely possible. That's why I talk about it a lot. That's why I invite people into these conversations. And I think that's the focus of the foundation. Our foundation has really shifted from our thinking about improving systems, continuing to improve systems, to getting to a place of transformation. But transformation has to include integration across systems. We cannot do it in silos. We're not going to create a 21st century child and family well-being system solely within the context of child welfare. There has to be a connection across systems and actually much deeper in community. So so we have to think about it from an integrated perspective. What if we shifted our focus? What if we thought differently about what sorry, next slide, thank you. You're ahead of me, or I'm ahead of you. Shifting our focus to what we want for children and families and communities, shifting our focus away from our particular system, our particular discipline, our particular piece of that child and family that we dissect them based on where we sit in the systems, what our role is in working with them. But what if we thought about this in a much more holistic frame? What if we redefined what our collective goals are with respect to vulnerable children and families in our communities? What if we redefine our respective relationships around a different set of goals, relationships across systems within the professional world? So shifting our focus is something that I think we need to consider, we need to entertain. And there's some tension behind that too, because sometimes if we shift our focus, like somebody's out there thinking, he just said we shouldn't pay attention to safety. That's not what I said. Safety is still paramount. But if we only focus on safety, our entire orientation is going to be putting that child in a different circumstance, right? Which most of the time requires us to remove a child from that home and putting a bunch of scrutiny and attention onto that family. But if our focus was in a broader context and safety being paramount, but being a component of well-being, then our thought process would be different. Our engagement with other system partners, our engagement with community, our investment in those children and families might shift a little bit differently. So I want to offer this definition of well-being. This comes from the Youth Transition Funders Group Well-Being Framework, which I've asked Sarah to share with everybody after the presentation. I will say too that there's been some local investments in writing about well-being. Chapin Hall has released a paper, easy for me to say, has recently released a paper talking about well-being in a much broader context. In fact, my initial investment or engagement with well-being came at a time when Brian Samuels and Claire Anderson from Chapin Hall, many of you know them, were at the Children's Bureau and promoting this broader, more holistic context of well-being for children that were in the child welfare system. I was part of a team at YTFG, Youth Transition Funders Group, that wrote a framework for well-being and child welfare. And we're at this meeting. I'm demonstrating my brilliance, right? We're at this meeting and we're sharing this well-being framework focused on child welfare. And one of my colleagues from YTFG said, Lyman, we need one of those for juvenile justice. And my brilliance was, what would be different? Right? Asking the question, what would be different? So that wasn't brilliant. That was just like, I don't understand what we would do differently, other than really thinking about well-being from the context of children, families, and communities. So broadening this notion of well-being and not have it singularly focused on the child welfare system. So this basically says well-being is a satisfactory human condition characterized by health, happiness, and fulfillment. It's not a state of being that one achieves, then lives for a lifetime. I've had a couple of conversations this morning about different aches and pains at my age, at other people's ages. So well-being is something that we constantly focus on, right? We don't think about it like that, but it's not something that we arrive at and stay at. We have to continually work at it. It's not a circumstance. We need to be able to define for ourselves, really defining for oneself, moving forward and achieving well-being as a continual developmental process, beginning at infancy and continuing through the course of life. And we think a better term for it is actually well-becoming. So constantly focusing on that. And when we think about the children and families and communities that we serve, that we're concerned about, can we put that level of attention into this notion of well-becoming? So why well-being? And this started again, probably 15 years ago, 13, 14, 15 years ago, and we were contemplating a broader focus on well-being. First, systems are separated by funding streams, by discipline, and by language. We all have our own set of acronyms, our own set of House bill numbers, our own set of terms and phrases that we use. Well-being travels across systems. Well-being, if we bring in part of the framework, the intention of the framework was to define well-being from these different contexts. So we defined it from child welfare. We defined it from a perspective of youth justice. We defined it from a perspective of education. So all of these different contexts, we really showed how those different systems, those different contexts are contributing to the well-being of children, families, and communities. And so it became, for us, we think well-being is the coagulating agent, bringing people together, bringing systems together. The example that I frequently use is for child protection, which is focused on safety and permanency, to invite education or mental health or another system to come alongside and say, we need you to help us keep this child safe, or we need you to help us get this child in a permanent relationship. The reaction is, well, no, that's what you do. That's what child protection is supposed to do. So how do we align ourselves around that? Rather than asking the question, how can you come alongside and help these children, families, and communities become well? What's your investment in that well-being from a different context? So I think that's part of it. It's coagulating, it travels across systems. We've already demonstrated that narrow approaches, siloed approaches don't get us the best outcomes for children and families. They don't get us the best bang for our buck. They don't get us the best results. And even, they don't even give us really the best vision for what we're trying to do. It helps us shift when we think about well-being. It really helps us shift from transactional to transformational change. If we are successful in helping children, families, and communities become well, then our answer to that earlier question is that, yeah, the children are well. So I think that's part of the reason that well-being resonates so much for me and many of the colleagues that I work with, is that we can see it manifest across systems. We can bring people together in this space. Well-being offers a life course perspective. We are focused on circumstances in our systems. Once we get a child safe, we may not be done, but we let out a big breath of relief, right? Once we get a child in a permanent home, we may not be done, but we're not giving the same level of investment that we were before. So it's thinking about children and families, not from the presenting circumstance, but how is our decision-making, how is our investment in resources contributing to that child's life next year, 5 years down the road, into adolescence, into adulthood? How are those investments impacting that? And we have to, again, think about that from a collective perspective. Well-being absolutely aligns science with current and best practice across systems. The framework cites many resources, many scientific resources that really support this idea of investing in well-being and well-becoming. It moves us away from circumstances and helps us think about our role in healing children and families and communities and creating a sense of wholeness for them. And then it centers justice and equity. We can't talk about well-being without talking about racial justice, without talking about racialized trauma, without talking about trauma associated with other oppressions. I'm not in the business of ranking oppressions, but we do need to focus on alleviating those oppressions, those marginalized dynamics for children and families based on some other thing, based on their race or ethnicity, based on their sexual orientation, based on their immigration status. So really centering racial justice, not just as a through line through all well-being domains, and you'll see a set of domains in the well-being framework, but also as its own domain. And so the YTFG framework is the only place that I've seen, and that doesn't mean it's the only place that exists, but it's the only place that I've seen racial justice identified as a well-being domain, specifically as a well-being domain and what that means. So, next slide, please. I remembered that time. Thanks, Sarah. As I mentioned, we have systems that are operating on 19th and 20th century principles. We are now in 2024. You believe that? Man, that happened quickly, didn't it? 2024, so we're essentially a quarter of the way through the 21st century. What do we want for this century? What do we want this century to look like when we think about children, families, and communities? And I think that's a question that we have to engage in. What is it that we want to do differently? Can we resist the way things are? Can we resist the structures of the systems that drive decision-making, that drive investments in children and families and communities? And can we think differently about that? And do we have the courage and patience to create this vision of something completely different while at the same time we're running these other systems, we're running the system the way it currently operates? And I would submit to you that we actually have to do both. And so, again, invite you to think about that. So next slide, please, Sarah. So a 21st century well-being system really shifts away from the way I described the way systems operate now. It's proactive and protective. So we move upstream and supporting children and families in their communities before harm happens, before there's a need for that. And this is a tough one too, because prevention is one of those things that, you know, typically the question is, well, how do you prove that you prevented something from happening? How do you prove that? How do you build a set of measures and evaluation standards around this notion of prevention? I think we can figure that out. I don't have a particular answer to that right now, but I do think that we can figure that out. And that's one of those questions that we need not to allow get in the way of a vision that we're trying to create. A 21st century system, well-being system, will focus on primary prevention and early intervention. So in all systems, not just in child welfare, but thinking about how do we invest in communities that prevent harm? How do we think about investing in schools, in other systems that prevent criminal behavior or prevent the circumstances that bring children and families to our attention? A 21st century child and family well-being system is strengths-based. It focuses on the assets that families bring. It focuses on the voice of families, young people who have used our systems. What are they telling us about what works, about what's needed? Can we really think about that? And it's holistic. So it's not centering one particular domain or one particular system, but it's really thinking collectively about what we're investing in those children and families. And it, again, life course perspective is right there. So we are thinking about this out beyond the current time that we're working with a child or family. And again, some of this is repetitive, but this 21st century system definitely centers racial justice, racial equity, and justice as a thread in a specific domain. Sorry for the repetition, but redundancy is an adult learning style, right? So next slide, I want to introduce you to my grandson. And this is a little bit of a story around that has helped orient me around this notion of the ability for us to work collectively towards a particular goal. My grandson was born, he went to term. This is me with him, the first time I met him. His name is AJ. And he went to term, but he was like 4 pounds when he was born, and he had some nutrition issues. He spent 6 weeks in NICU, in the neonatal intensive care unit. Anybody had an experience with NICU? Yeah, it was amazing. Now, these folks often deal with infants who don't survive. So we watched some of that happen. But what I watched with AJ was this group of people, all with different disciplines, different titles, different focuses. We had doctors, nurses, nutritionists, radiologists, what do they call them, the blood people, hematologists, all working on AJ. They all had these different orientations, these different areas of focus, but they were all working collectively and in concert with one goal, just one goal, and that was to help AJ become well. And as I watched that and thinking about the work that we do together, I thought, okay, so this is possible. It is possible for us to come together in a very concerted way, in a very coordinated way to support the well-being, well-becoming of children, families, and communities. And the work that they did was amazing. Next slide, please. This is AJ after his time in NICU. So he came out of NICU whole, healthy, and just robust. He's got other issues. He's 8 now, so we got some other behavioral issues. But the reality is that he's doing amazingly well. In fact, next slide, this is a picture of him more recently, where he's a very precocious 8-year-old. Yeah, he's just full of life, vibrant, and he's healthy. And we owe that to the 6 weeks that he spent in NICU and to all of the collective efforts of that unit to help him become well. So I share that story partly to share a little bit about me and my family, but also to share that this is possible, to, I hope, instill some thoughts that we can come together. We have the ability to do that. And this is just a small example of how that can work. Next slide, please, Sarah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about components of transformation and share with you some ideas and actually some new learning from me around what transformation means and how we get to that space. But I want you to think about, and this is a question that I ask myself all the time, what do I want to be known for? What do we want to be known for in this work? Now, for me personally, it's absolutely to be an amazing husband. If Stevie was here, she would be able to weigh in on that. Sometimes, yeah, sometimes not so much. A good father, a great grandfather, and they call me Poppy. So yeah, the most amazing Poppy. Those are things that I definitely want to be known for. But in the work that we do together, what do we want to be known for? Do we want to be known for, I mean, you answer the question. What do I want to be known for? Do I want to be known for perpetuating the systems as they are? And you know, that's fine. There's not a problem. In doing this work is commendable. It's admirable. Is it possible that we could shift that question a little bit and say that we want to be known for something different? We want to be known for creating a different vision, a different set of outcomes for children and families that we're investing in. And this also leads into this notion of transformation. We all use that word. Do we mean the same thing? I've heard different things being described as being transformative. I'll take a shot at this and somebody may jump up and holler at me, but Families First and Prevention Services Act has been described as transforming child welfare. I disagree with that. Families First fixed a funding problem. Families First opened up the entitlement, the 4E entitlement, to allow states to fund different things, fund things for families, to use that entitlement in a different way. It's a great thing. It's absolutely a great thing. But did it change practice? Did it change fundamentally the system that we're working with? And I would argue that it's not transformative. It definitely is better. So I'm not disparaging Families First. I absolutely think it's the right thing to do, and we're supporting Illinois in rolling it out. But it's not transformation. So I think we get caught in this tension of describing things that are more transactional or more surface level as being transformational. It's another little funny, next slide, please. So are we serious about transformation, or are we still focused on tinkering? And this, if you can't see this, it says, the caption says, I want you to find a bold and innovative way to do exactly the same way it's been done for 25 years. And how often do we do that with projects, with programs that aren't really being transformative? It's improvement is great, but it's not really getting us to a place where we're fundamentally different. Next slide, please. This is one of my favorite authors, Peter Drucker. He talks a lot about organizational dynamics. Great thinker and writer. He suggests that the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it's to act with yesterday's logic. So our thinking has to shift. Our thinking has to transform. It can't continue to go back into the things that have gotten us to where we are, the historic narratives of the systems that we are concerned about. Culture change requires us to think differently. Culture change, transforming systems requires us to think differently. I mentioned it earlier. We have to continue to do the work that we're doing while we build something new. We have to think about what our why is. Again, what do you want to be known for? What's your why in this space? What's your why in this work? Do we have a sense of vision, a sense of collective vision that allows us to come together with a singular outcome? Not that our work has to be the same or we all have to be in the same organization, but do we have a sense of vision that allows us to get to a different future? We have to embrace integrated approaches internally within our systems. I mean, even within like Casey Family Programs. We have a child and family services team. We have a systems improvement team. We have a public policy team. We have teams that are distinct, and some of the tension that we experience in the foundation, and I suspect you experience them yourselves in the systems that you work in, is that we don't necessarily work in concert. We need to figure out how to build bridges across these silos internally and systemically, and across sectors. We need to learn how to be relational. Sometimes I marvel, not sometimes, I always marvel at how poorly we treat each other in this work that we do. We can be the meanest folks talking to each other inside organizations, across systems. You know, this adversary over here, this system over here, we spend a lot of time pointing fingers. And it really is amazing to me how poorly we treat each other without recognizing the fact that we're all here for the right reasons. We're here with the right motives. None of us is getting rich off of this thing, right? But the reality is that we're all here to serve children and families. And how do we figure out that alignment and resist this temptation to see each other as adversaries? So being relational is important across systems, across organizations, within our respective organizations. Recognizing progress, but waiting to celebrate success. One of the things that I see happening, and this is particularly vivid in the racial justice work, is that we pause to celebrate progress. And I think it's important for us to recognize progress and talk about it a lot, but pausing to celebrate progress takes us off the track of ultimately gaining the kind of success, creating the kind of success that we want to achieve in the long run. So just being thoughtful about that as leaders, we do have to recognize work that's being done, but can we hold on to make sure that we don't lose momentum towards that vision of success? Clarity, clarity, clarity. I do a lot of work in organizational health. And one of the things that we need to center ourselves even more on as leaders, as system partners, is this notion of clarity, making sure that we're articulating clear messaging, that we're consistent about that. We, one of the examples that I'll share at Casey Family Programs in 2005, I think it was, we fundamentally shifted our focus as a foundation. We had 40 years of history as the nation's premier long-term foster care agency. We would take full custody of children from the jurisdictions, from the states, and raise them in our long-term foster care programs. We realized that that wasn't effective. That wasn't getting us the results. In fact, the amount of money that we were spending per kid, or the amount of money we were spending on a very small number of kids relative to the hundreds of thousands of children that are in care across the country, was only touching a very small percentage, a very small handful of children. So we reoriented ourselves around how we could impact this broader system, how we could think about systems improvement, use our practice, shift our practice so that it was more relevant to public child welfare and actually improving outcomes for kids and families that experience the system. So we shifted our focus and created a vision that we called our 2020 vision. So our 2020 vision was that we were going to help the systems reduce the number of children in foster care by 50% safely, by 50% by the year 2020. We had to spend 3 years asking the question over and over and over again, how does that contribute to 2020? How does that contribute to our end game of reducing the number of children in foster care? Because we were making this big shift from long-term foster care to permanency work, to prevention work. And so that's what I mean when I say clarity and being consistent with that clarity, always asking the questions, is this getting us where we want to go? How is this work in investing in this future that we're trying to create. Next slide, please, Sarah. So this is a definition of transformation that I like. Basically, in an organizational context, and you could put system in there, systemic context. It's a process of profound and radical change that orients an organization in a new direction. Organization or system orients us in a new direction and takes it into an entirely different level of effectiveness. Unlike turnaround, which implies incremental progress on the same plane, transformation implies a basic change of character, for an organization or system with little or no resemblance to the past configuration of that structure, to the past configuration or structure. Can we see a future like that? Can we really think about transformation as creating something completely different? So that's the definition that I think about and offer to you as something to contemplate. Now, this notion of transformation is something that I'm continuing to learn about. As I mentioned, 40 years leading transformational efforts unsuccessfully. I mean, I think there's been a lot of good stuff that's come out of the transformation stuff, but my own learning is around how we build strategies, tactics, supports, language that get people aligned in this notion of transformation. It doesn't, if we can collectively bring ourselves together, it doesn't take away the value of a particular organization or a particular individual. It really just creates this sense of alignment and gets us focused on the children and families that we're concerned about. So my more recent learning is actually from an author, and some of you may know him, Dr. Sean Ginwright, who's written a lot about radical healing in the racial justice space, but has also been very influential in our work at Casey Family Programs on what he calls healing-centered engagement. But he wrote a book recently called The 4 Pivots that I highly recommend. So I'm going to share a couple of thoughts from the 4 pivots that I think align with this idea of a 21st century child and family well-being system and how we get to a sense of transformation. So he starts with a couple of myths, 4 myths actually. First, that we can get to deep change from surface level solutions. So that aligns with the notion of tinkering or transformation. Are we focusing on circumstances? Are we staying at the surface level? Or are we serious about getting to root causes and the deep-rooted issues that lead to the problems that we're experiencing in child welfare and the other systems serving vulnerable children and families? So that doesn't mean that we ignore the improvement efforts, but it does mean we have to understand what the root causes are and have a parallel or an additional focus on getting to those root causes. Can we actually alleviate the problems, the issues that families face that cause them to come to our attention? Can we get to that level of investment? And I think it's possible if we are collective about it. I think we can absolutely do that. We can get to a healing frame. We can get to the presenting issues if we are collective and thoughtful about that. So there's not a formula yet. So if you're waiting for me to tell you what that formula is, no, we're going to have to create that together. I'm happy to be part of this moving forward, and I'm happy that Casey Family Programs is here in Illinois, but this requires a real heavy collective effort. So it's interesting that the conversation around transformation is absolutely happening in Illinois. It's happening in 3 or 4 different places. So the question is, can we bring that alignment together and make sure that we're all talking about the same thing? The second myth that Dr. Ginwright proposes is that we can get more change if we have more power. That's proven to be ineffective, that power dynamics actually don't get us the kind of effective change. We see leaders come and go, we see organizations come and go, and it really is less about power that we hold as decision makers or organizations or systems, and more about how we recognize the power that families have, that communities have, and how we can invest in that power. They know what the answers are. They know what the solutions are. They may not articulate them and the same level of language or the same acronyms that we use, but they know what the solutions are. Can we think about that differently? Can we think about that, how we see that power? He suggests that it is a myth too that we can strategize for social change. And that's not to disparage the notion of strategic planning, strategic thinking. We have to be strategic. That's not a question. But if we focus on this notion of strategy as the solution, it doesn't get us to the fundamental things that will get us to this 21st century child and family well-being system. It doesn't focus on the healing aspects. Healing doesn't happen through strategy. Healing happens through relationship. If we're focused on strategy, we may be sitting in a room like this doing a bunch of flow charts and what's the thing that we always use? It's the decision analysis. I forget the name of it. SWOT analysis, but there's also another one. It's like, the logic model. Let's create a logic model, right? Not bad stuff. It helps us really get clear about what we're trying to accomplish. But if we're serious about social change and the kind of transformation we need to think about, we have to get proximate with those we're trying to help. We have to be in the neighborhoods and in the communities. It just doesn't, we can't sit in a one-off space in isolation and create these strategies and programs. We have to be in relationship, in proximity with the communities that we're trying to support, trying to help. And this last one, that we are somehow required to be in an us versus them dynamic. And it's not a requirement, but it is kind of our culture, right? And especially, and I think most of us would recognize that in this day and age, the polarity is man, it's thick, right? That we are aligned in kind of adversarial ways, where we're polarized politically, we're polarized economically, we're polarized racially, we're polarized in so many different ways. And I think that what Dr. Ginwright would argue is that that only sets us up to cause more harm, to marginalize people. Our history in this country is one of marginalization. We can trace that back to slavery, to the genocide of our tribal brothers and sisters, to a number of different things that are still impacting our systems. And we have to figure out how to resist that us versus them thinking. We have to figure out how to resist that polarity in the work that we do. And it happens in the child welfare space. And I'll say this, and I might not be invited back, right? But it's like providers versus DCFS. I mean, that's a polarization. Advocates, adversaries versus the system, the legal system, the judiciary, all of these folks that have these different perspectives that tend to be adversarial. How do we rethink that and bring ourselves together into alignment? The us versus them dynamic causes us to give other people identities based on something that we disagree with or we don't like. I mean, how often have we created an identity for a child based on a particular behavior or a particular circumstance that doesn't describe the wholeness of that child, but we've given them that identity? We call them foster kids. We call them delinquents. Whatever that is, we need to think differently about that and resist this temptation to be in that us versus them frame. There's so much more on that, and that's one of the core things that I think this notion of transformation has to incorporate, and that is how we align ourselves. How do we come together? How do we treat ourselves? How do we treat each other? Can we embrace other ideas and listen and hear them, even if they're not our own ideas, or even if we disagree? Can we sit down with people and engage in a healthy conversation, a conversation about something better, even though that person may have offended us at some point, or may have a completely different idea? And I mean, it's playing out obviously politically across the country. Can we sit down across political lines and really think about what's best for children and families? What's best for our communities? Next slide, please, Sarah. These are some pivots that Dr. Jenwright offers, and I'm still learning how to practice them, but I think they're really important. The first one is we have to figure out where our gaze is. What are we looking at? What are we looking out the window, or are we spending time in the mirror? And often when we're struggling with problems, we're facing problems, we externalize those problems, right? We look out the window. Whose fault is it? Who else needs to be here? Provided who's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, rather than really getting into the mirror and say, okay, what am I contributing to this? How am I being part of the solution? What are my own biases or my own issues that get in the way of something better? And so talking a lot about mirror work and being reflective in our respective roles, shifting our relationships away from transaction to transformation. Often it's give and take, you know, I'll help you if you help me. I don't want anything to do with you because you did this over here. You know, those are transactional relationships. Can we come together in this transformational frame to see how we're all contributing to the well-being of children, families, and communities? Shifting our thinking from problems to possibilities. We get focused on problems. Our systems are designed around problems. Many of the statutes in law are driven by the sensational, by tragedy. Not that we shouldn't respond to that, but they're centered on problems. We see children and families as problems. We see vulnerable communities as problems that we need to solve, we need to fix. Can we see possibilities? Can we create a frame? Can we create an environment that invites us to think about families from an asset perspective, from a strength perspective, and the same for communities? So shifting our focus from problems and trying to solve and fix these problems into possibilities, that's the shift from what is to what could be, from thinking about what we have to what we envision for the 21st century and our children and families and communities. Dr. Jenwright suggests that we're addicted to frenzy. I see some laughing and some head nodding. We are. We got to be busy. We are addicted to frenzy. We're addicted to the urgent. We have to solve these problems. And I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't pay attention to what's urgent. There are severe safety issues that we need to pay attention to and need to figure out how to respond to, but that's not where our work stops. So thinking more about how we spend time together, building relationships, being in a sense of flow, being able to manage the day-to-day priorities while at the same time thinking about this future that we're trying to create. So kind of flowing into that space, making sure that we're taking care of ourselves too. That's a big issue with flow. How do we focus on our own wellness? This work is hard. We need to recognize that. So if I have anything that I will leave with you, drink more water and breathe right. Right? Really pay attention to your body, pay attention to your wellness. So taking that pivot from hustle to flow and really getting into space where we create the ability, we create the environment that allow us to think from a visionary perspective. So this can happen. This is possible. It's going to take more than just me standing up here talking about it. I think that there's some real intention here in Illinois to think differently about how the system's constructed, how the system responds to vulnerable children and families. There's a lot of amazing people. You all are amazing. I love coming here. I love working with you, and I really am honored and privileged to be in front of you today. But there's so many amazing people here in Illinois that are really concerned about children and families. And so don't take that lightly. It's something that can be built on. There are a lot of people, Mike is talking about this notion of vision. What are we trying to do differently? Colleagues in the provider community. There are people at LCFS that are talking about this notion of transformation and how we need to shift our focus to well-being, well-becoming. So I just encourage you in that. Hope that this has at least caused you to ask some questions, to ponder some things, maybe inspired to look at things a little differently, to go a little bit deeper in how you might contribute to a different future, to this notion of what we should have in the 21st century. Sorry, next slide. Sarah, I'm wrapping up. can we do better by our children and families? What do we want for the 21st century with respect to children, families, and communities? And really lean into that. You all are amazing. It's really been a privilege to be with you this morning. I thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to questions as they come. So I'll invite Natasha to come back up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lyman, for your sharing your valuable insights and expertise with us today. I heard you say a couple of things that I think really do call us into action. I mean, I heard you talk about, you asked earlier about how are the children and can we choose to be in alignment with people and get to a shared sense of healing. And I think that that's super important versus this idea of rescuing. I also heard that you invited us to evaluate ourselves and our systems by asking some really critical questions. One that stuck out to me is whether or not our system is good enough for you and ours. Is the system that we have right now. There's a lot of great people, like great leaders and advocates in this room and in the virtual space. But is the system that we have right now one that we would invite our loved ones who are experiencing the woes of the world and circumstances, would we invite them to be served by us? And if our answer is no to that, right, is should be challenging ourselves to ask ourselves also the other question that he asked us around, are we engaged in transactions, competing and tinkering, or are we being transformative towards kind of the human condition and this idea of becoming, of well-becoming? And so impactful questions that I know that I will be asking and trying to answer myself. And I think Mike will give us some thoughts and a little bit about LCFS's assessment and thinking about how we can be a participant in change and our vision and driving force and creating a roadmap in LCFS. And so with that, I'd like to introduce LCFS's very own president and CEO, Mike Bertrand. Mike joined LCFS in 2005, serving in numerous leadership positions, including the role of president and CEO since 2017. With more than 30 years of social services experiences, Mike has worked with the Department of Children and Family Services, Lutheran Social Services of Illinois, and the Whole House Association and United Healthcare Corporation. Mike has a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Illinois Champaign, Urbana. He's like, yes. A master's degree in social work from the University of Illinois at Chicago, and is a licensed clinical social worker. He is passionate about ensuring that we never give up on a child and was the co-creator of the award-winning Regenerations program for dually involved youth, which has really produced some amazing results. Currently, Mike is the board member for the Illinois Collaboration for Youth, and also nationally active with Lutheran Services of America and Social Currents. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Tasha. I don't have a fancy iPad or anything to go off of. So I'm going to very briefly kind of tell you the LCFS story and the LCFS perspective and within our place within the state of Illinois. But it's not for the purpose of you learning about LCFS at all. What I want people in both, and I know we have people in other states online, is to think about your organization, your role within whatever system you're a part of. I know we have some of our board members and former board members, if nothing else, that the communities you're a part of and the children within your communities and how you can be a part of ensuring, as Lyman said, that every child does well. Because as you go across our country, we all know that not all children are doing well. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But again, as I'm highlighting our work and I'm highlighting our commitment and kind of where we're at in our journey, because that's all I'm here to talk about is our journey. What I want you to think about is what does that mean for you and your journey, both professionally, personally, and any way you take that. So that's why we didn't ask Lyman to come out and just talk to us at LCFS. We invited all of you, and thank you so much for joining us today. Again, both online, not to say here's what we think needs to happen for children. And I loved, as Lyman was talking about, all these crazy systems we set up, that we put people in buckets. versus saying, well, what do we want for children in our communities? It's really as simple as that. And when I think about even my own neighborhood that I live in today, I don't know a whole lot of my neighbors. When I was growing up as a kid, I knew everybody, and it was like, neighborhood parenting. You messed up down the street, someone was gonna, an adult was gonna step in and correct you and say, oh, hold up. Keep that, this is the framework we're coming from. I'm gonna talk to you a little bit our journey as an organization. As well, and it's hard to do that without talking about personal journey sometimes. So go ahead, Sarah, and so in 1873, as Lyman highlighted, LCFS was founded. We had a different name back there when 14 congregations established the Addison-based German Evangelical Lutheran Orphan Home Association of Northern Illinois. Look at that nice building there. So like many of the organizations in Illinois, particularly the historic, started from some faith tradition or not, and started as an orphanage, started as, we need to care for children. Let's get together and let's do that. Let's care for these children and have a place where we can do that. Not good, bad, or indifferent is exactly where we're at as an organization for LCFS and as a state and as a country. Go ahead. So in today, LCFS serves more than 2,000 children every year in foster care. And there's going to be a reason why I'm telling you this, and this represents approximately 80% of our budget is caring for children in foster care, is being a part of our current system and the way things are currently done, that, as Lyman pointed out, has unintended consequences and unintended ways of doing things, and being a reactionary way of doing things versus a well-being, well-becoming. I like that term. We're gonna have to change. We'd have gotten that your slide sooner. We could have changed it to be becoming a well-becoming system. But go ahead again. I'm not trying to take up a lot of time because I want to have plenty of time for questions and answers. So I wanted to share our mission and vision. So our mission is to nurture and strengthen children and families in need. You notice that doesn't say to care for children. That doesn't say to be a premier provider of foster care. That doesn't say to ensure that children come to us and we give them something, or families come to us and we give them something. It says to nurture and strengthen children and families in need. And I really love our vision. And it fuels a lot of our advocacy work and a lot of our policy work and a lot of the journeys we've gone down over the last few years, is a world where all of God's children have the opportunity for safe, healthy, and meaningful lives. Lyman on many times drove home the point that you cannot talk about our systems without talking about equity. I know, sharing a little bit of personal journey, I started in 1987, fresh out of the University of Illinois, as a social service career trainee in the Department of Child Protection for Illinois LCFS, which meant that I did the job of a child abuse investigator and got about half the money because I was a social service career trainee. Now I lost my train of thought on my own journey. So, and in my younger days as a social worker, so I went and got my my MSW and so on. I know we have NASW in the room. Was very active in work in the criminal justice system, and particularly how the criminal justice system, the people of color, were so significantly overrepresented. And I'm like, so here I am, I'm working in this good system. I'm in this system that's helping people, this horrible criminal justice system that's exploiting families of color. I need to do something about that. Aha moment of 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. So sharing on my personal journey is like, well, looking at the overrepresentation of children of color in the child welfare system was a really wake-up call to me to say, wow, here I am, I'm CEO of one of the larger child welfare agencies. And I've made a nice little career, 37-year career, in a system that's exploitive of families of color. I'll say that, I'm saying that publicly. We are a system and we're coming to grips with that. I was just looking up the latest data out of the University of Illinois, that African-American children in particular make up 17% of the children of the population of Illinois. And about 40% of the children in foster care, but we've got it down to about 35% of coming in. 5 years ago, the African-American children were 50% of the children in foster care. So we cannot talk about this work without talking about being a just society and talking about what that looks like and being honest with what our role in that has been. Unintentionally, speaking for myself and speaking for LCFS, unintentionally, full intention of helping families. So again, I'm trying to share our journey and ask that you put that in the context of where you're at with your journey, both professionally and personally. So go ahead. So strategically, there's a reason why I shared both our 151-year history as well as the percentage of our budget is in the current system. This is one of our 4 strategic goals. We kind of broke the rules and set out some big 10-year goals. You're not supposed to do that. It's supposed to be 3 to 5. Some say 2 to 3 now with the fast pace of the world. But one of our strategic goals, which means I have to be accountable to my board of trustees, how we're progressing on this, is be a driving force in our state to make services available to families and youth at any time they are needed, with a focus on preventing need for deep end services such as residential and foster care for children. So our 150+ year identity has been on caring for children. 80% of our revenue, and I own my responsibility as CEO is I'm also an employer. We're also an employer. We employ 450 people. We're saying, okay, is that what's right for families, and is that why we exist? And is that consistent with our mission and vision? So we have said we're going to be a driving force. As Lyman was pointing out, the us and them, I'm one of the few, it's getting far and few between. I did 2 tours at DCFS, as well as been in the private sector. So I believe there is this us and them, and having worked both for DCFS and on the private side, I always say there's just as many people within DCFS, just like we are. We're all here to help. We're all trying to do the best for children and families. Let's get over this us and them. But I know my own strengths and weaknesses. One of my strengths is I have a very big mouth, and I'm not afraid to use it. And that we need to keep this at the forefront. I brought a group of private sector leaders together about 6 months ago with this concept, and have done nothing with it up until planning for this meeting. What happened? I got involved in the day-to-day, the things that always grab our attention. We all know that if you've worked in this field, both in Illinois or anywhere, you know that you set out with, here's what I'm going to do, and then things happen. And things get moving, and that takes your energy and attention away and loses your focus. So for me, having this as a goal and knowing I have to report out to my bosses and saying, how are we doing on this, is that I have to get back to it. And it's our commitment not to be it doesn't say the driving force. I'm hoping like heck that we're just one of many voices within our state and within our country, really, because we have a lot of work to do as a country. And if you remember our vision, it said a world, didn't say a state, didn't say a city. It said a world where all children are nurtured and can achieve their God-given potential. Go ahead. So again, what we want to be a part of is establishing a roadmap. There's a reason why I have this up here. So DCFS was established in 1964 as the nation's first cabinet level state child welfare agency. Now, many of us in this room may not know, but my predecessor was a great historian. And at the time, child protection and foster care was under what was the old version of DHS. And it was the private agencies that had been active for quite some time, who had really been part of the advocacy work in the legislature to say, we need an entity within the state structure, a cabinet level, to really focus on child welfare. I love the term child well-being. Folks that sometimes I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I repeat myself a lot. But when I would sit in rooms within our system and say, well, wait a second, because in Illinois, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit, we were a very placement focused system. My daughters are now all in their 20s. And I used to say, I wake up every morning with the welfare of my children first and foremost, and that doesn't mean I'm getting up trying to get them into foster care. Our system is not looking at the welfare of children. And LCFS as an agency started providing foster care for children around 1980. Why do I have this up here? So as a focus, as a child welfare system, as a child protection system, as an agency, even though it was existing before since 1964, for LCFS as an agency since 1980. We didn't get here overnight. We can't expect that in a year we can change the way we're dealing with children and families. It's going to take some time. So the reason we have a roadmap is because I think it's time that we come together and say, what do we need to do? And this needs to be a long-range plan. What's that roadmap look like? And like any roadmap, you get down the road and maybe there's a detour. Oh, we didn't know this road was closed or this came in the way, but how do we still get to? So how do we still get to where we want to end up, which is this well-being system that Lyman and Casey family has been done way more thinking about than I have. Go ahead. Okay, so I want to point out, and I've gotten the last few years, gotten very active, knowing that to really get where we want to go is probably going to take potentially some legislative change also. So I've gotten really active with meeting all over the state with elected officials. And currently there's about 20,000 children. Any of my DCFS colleagues, is that still about the number? It's the last I polled. About 20,000 children and youth who are under state of Illinois guardianship. Why I say we are the state of Illinois? Hello. We are all, at least in this room, I know we've got folks online from other states. We are citizens of this state. We are responsible for these children. It's not this person over here that is the name guardian. It's not DCFS. It's not the governor. One of the things I really like that not too much I liked, not to get political, with Governor Rauner. But if you look at the DCFS org chart, he's the one, when I noticed, he's the first one to put people of the state of Illinois at the top of the org chart, then the governor, then the director of the DCFS. So we are responsible for the children in care today. But really, I hope we extend that thinking, extend that responsibility again to that sense of community, to that sense of, I talked about when I was growing up in Springfield, Illinois. Everybody knew each other, and I knew not to act up down the street in front of Mr. Holrick. You didn't want to act up in front of Mr. Holrick, trust me, because that would be addressed there, and people had much more ownership, in my humble opinion, and a greater vision of what it meant for the future with children and so on and so forth. So what I want to drive home for us, and again, those online from other states, you are also the guardian of any children that you have in care. And as I talked about, and Lyman talked about, we have what we want for our children. Well, these are our children. And I wanted to drive that point home. And as Lyman said, because we have 20,000 children, we can't just say, stop everything. Let's take a step back and figure this out. We need to build the new plane while continuing to fly, because we both have these 20,000 children that we're responsible for, and which means families, not just children. But we want to do better, and we want to change our systems. We want to say, what does it need to look like, and how do we gradually move things in that direction? one of the things that I'm really, really, really careful about. Because obviously there's always fiscal issues to be concerned about. But what I'm careful about, when I advocate for this is, well, that doesn't mean if we decrease children in care that we need to decrease resources that go into families. Because we're stopping to give the wrong intervention, doesn't mean that there isn't assistance or intervention that families need. If we just say, well, we're not gonna come into foster care, and I don't know if we have any, there is an abolitionist movement within foster care. And as Lyman pointed out, the trauma that happens. And as I shared, I spent about 7 years directly doing DCFS investigations, as well as oversaw a team later on my second tour of duty. We still need child protection. There are issues. I remember when I got into this, I had a neighbor who was a deputy director at DCFS, and when I wanted to do this, he said, "You sure you want to do this? You're going to see some things." Yeah, we do need a protection system, but that shouldn't be our only system. We are a reactive system, as Lyman said. When I go out and talk with elected officials, this is the example I always use as why I think our system is broken, or needs to be vastly improved. And I always use the example of a teacher. So I use the example of a teacher. If you have a student in your classroom and you're noticing, okay, well, they've kind of showed up, in the same clothes the last 3 days. I asked them what they had for breakfast, and they kind of gave me a half answer. And I noticed they've been much more withdrawn, and so on. Now, maybe if you're a school district that can afford school social workers, you'll have the school social worker come and try to talk and see what they can do for the child. But in many communities, like, well, okay, I'm going to call the child welfare system. I'm going to call 1-800-25-ABUSE. And you do that as a teacher, and one of the DCFS hotline workers pick up. And as they're supposed to do, they screen and they say, well, it doesn't sound like anything's happened yet. Call us back when something happens. And I was like, well, how crazy is that? We want to wait till something bad happens to a child, then we got something. Now we've been putting things in place. We have a child welfare referral system now. So we've started to bring some pieces in, but we also have a considerable way to go. So again, Illinois and many other states have focused on child protection and reactive services. That's what I was getting at. We got something when something bad happens. We're going to step in and protect. But why would we want to wait? Why would we want to wait until something happens? And as Lyman said, we really like this ability to use data and prove effectiveness. And I get all that, and we have to do that. And I promise, when Lyman was talking about trying to do his incredibly horrible rocket science joke, what sprung to mind is I try to make it a point at LCFS to participate in all of our new employee orientations. So those of us that have been through that are gonna hear this again. And then many of those are caseworkers. And I always say that what we do, and I'll say that to social workers, I'll say that to anybody in human services, is not rocket science. It's a million times tougher. Because again, once a rocket scientist figures out, I need X amount of fuel to create X amount of thrust to get X amount of pounds to the moon, they just repeat that with every rocket, and 99% of the time it works. We deal with human beings. We deal with traumatized families. We deal with marginalized families. And even I don't claim to be a highly functioning human being. You don't get the same thing out of me every day. And same thing. So what we do is, I always say, in my humble opinion in social work, is half science and half, the only term I can think of, is art form, intuitive, relational. Lyman talked about relational ability to engage people and help them say, yeah, I'm struggling and I need some help, and you've established a relationship and I can make that happen. And I think that, longitudinally, the proof will be in the pudding. The proof will be in the pudding sharing some of my family. I had a daughter who struggled with some mental health issues. And we were able, and as soon as we identified that, we didn't wait until something horrible happened and had to go to the extreme. We got some help in there. And so to me, the data is she didn't end up needing more because she got help when things first started. And we're largely a placement-based system versus a family well-being and supportive system. So in Illinois, I shared we have 20,000 children in care. We serve about 4,000 families a year in our intact services. Again, when I'm out meeting with elected officials, I always contrast that to the New York metropolitan area, which mirrors population-wise about the state of Illinois in terms of numbers, where they have 8,000 children in foster care and serve 20,000 children, or 20,000 families intact, and do not have a higher rate of adverse. They don't have a higher rate of children getting hurt and so on and so forth. So it can be done. And for me, this is a linear thing. But this is just my thinking. What we're hoping, and I'm going to talk a little bit to come out of this, is that is what we plan on doing to try to move us towards that well-being and well-becoming system I'm going to have to learn to use. So go ahead. Like I said, I want to leave plenty of time for question and answer. So what is our commitment? Why do we ask people to come? What are we asking people to do? And again, this is obviously we operate within the state of Illinois, but I put the same piece out there to the folks from other states that are listening in. So our commitment is we've already asked Casey Family Programs and other key stakeholders to spearhead a process to develop that roadmap. We didn't get here overnight. As a matter of fact, we spent decades upon decades becoming the system that we are today. Again, well-intended. Nobody has, but like any system, like any learning, like any community, things are not, what was, we're not still riding around on horses. Some people are. Things evolve. So we need to be looking too is how do we evolve? How do we get better? What do families need? How do we ensure that children are doing well and that children are propelled into the future to be successful? So we want to spearhead a process to develop a roadmap, a 10-year plan to move our state to a community-focused child well-being. So can it be done in 10 years? No, but I think let's set a goal for 10 years, what we want to look at. And at that point, I'm assuming the group of folks, 10 years, and I probably won't be retired by then. But how do we prepare the new leaders? So go ahead. So again, who should we have at the table? Many others. Community-based providers of services. So the LCFSs and the LSSIs, and I know we have the Cradle here, and I don't know who else all we have online and so on and so forth. State of Illinois cannot do this without our partners at DCFS. I shared in 1964, it was the community-based folks that really advocated for DCFS to be established. Illinois has always held themselves out as this public-private partnership. That at times, and I think depending on where we're at as a system, is still good. Sometimes it erodes, but that's really what we are. Ideally, we're a public-private partnership. Ideally, we are citizens, again, whether you work for DCFS, a private agency, or you're just a citizen of the state of Illinois. We all want what's best for our communities, and we all want what's best for children. Real important, and Lyman talked about this. Oh, no, go back. Families and youth in care. We need the input of the people that have been through the system, are in the system, are dealing with the system, say, here's what will help, here's what will not. We do that all the time. We as the professionals and valuable information. Those of us that have been doing this for a while, we have an understanding of the system also from one perspective, but we really need to bring the folks that have lived it into the dialogue, including foster parents. Foster parents are key part of our system. And they, as I say, as with our new caseworkers, I always say, take care of your foster parents. We are a intense system, very intense system, very complex system. And so what I always say to our workers is we spend 60, 70, 80 hours a week, because nobody spends 40 hours a week entrenched in this system. Our foster parents spend it 24/7. They have the children who are reacting to being a part of this system. They have to react to the frustrations of being a foster parent in the system, and so on and so forth. Elected officials. We've all seen the last few years, at least in Illinois, with some sensational cases and some other pieces, there's a lot of desire in the General Assembly for reform of DCFS. Or I shouldn't say DCFS, that's what they put it, but it's really the child welfare system in Illinois. We don't want them doing that in a way that's uninformed, so we want to bring them in. And we may need some of what we need to occur to happen legislatively. We know, as Lyman pointed out and talked about the Family First Act, a lot of it also flows federally from legislation. So elected officials are incredibly important because they control a lot of what can or could happen within our systems. The faith community. A lot of our agencies, speaking for LCFS, 151 almost years ago, stemmed up through that community. There's a lot of energy there. There's a lot of positivity there. There's a lot of I've been in the system long enough. Let me see if there's anybody else long enough. We had a one church, one family program many moons ago, 80s, early 90s maybe, to try to mobilize the faith community to support foster children. Say, just as a church, if somebody jump up to be foster parent, that congregation, please take the responsibility to support that entire piece. Academia. Lyman was talking about Chapin Hall, which is, if you don't know, is part of the University of Chicago, that's focused on research and advocacy based on that research around children and family issues, and many, many, many others. This is what jumped to mind. So go ahead. So again, as Lyman asked, what do we want to be known for? What do we want? There's the, and I don't know who said it. If say it, if not now, when? And we just want to be known for stewarding our system and hopefully doing things well within that system? Or do we want to be known for evolving to a place to say, can't we do better? Can't we do better for children? Can't we do better to ensure that our country and all the children?
Thank you again to our speakers today. Thank you for all of you who tuned in online, and for you of you who spent your time and came here and invested your time to be with us in person. Again, if we could give a round of applause to both Mike and to Lyman. So before we wrap up today's event, I just want to end us with a challenge. I'd ask for each of you to think about the things that were shared today, and what you could do within your roles to move us to the systems that we've been talking about. How could we move us to a family and child well-being system versus what we have today? If we can't ask and answer that charge around, would it be enough for our family? Would it be good enough for our family? With you, thank you all for being here with us today.